Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the explanation of your final lesson, your final for the class and your final for EdTech. So, what I've done is I've gone into course documents, as you can see right here, and I've gone all the way to the bottom where it says final lesson rubric, and this is what it brings up. It brings up the final lesson rubric. Now, for this assignment, what you will be doing is you will be in your groups, you will be researching one of four items. Okay, the research is behind digital gaming, right, as we see right here, the flipped classroom, as we see right here, SPED classroom, or project-based learning. So these are things that we've talked about briefly, but we've never really gone into full details about these items. So when we talk about digital gaming, your job, if your group chooses digital gaming, you will do research about how to incorporate digital gaming into your lesson. Okay, so in other words, how do we appropriately incorporate digital gaming into our classroom? If your group chooses the flipped classroom, then what you will do is you will be doing research about the flipped classroom. What are the best ways to incorporate the flipped lessons into your classroom? The SPED classroom, what are the best ways to incorporate technology into your classroom? Because as we know with special education students, there will be different items for different students depending on what their IEP discusses. So what are the best ways to incorporate technology into a special education classroom? And then finally, project-based learning. How do we incorporate technology if we are doing a project-based learning lesson? So basically what you will do is, again, your group will pick one of these four items, either digital gaming, the flipped classroom, the SPED classroom, or project-based learning, and you will research the best way to incorporate that into your classroom. Now, you all will have to pick a grade level. So if you decide to pick a fifth grade lesson teaching math and you want to learn how to incorporate digital gaming into that lesson, then your research should center around either elementary or middle school digital gaming. Same thing for the flipped classroom, the SPED classroom, and project-based learning. So again, make sure the research is appropriate to your grade level. If you're doing secondary, you don't want research that's coming from an elementary research project. You want to make sure that you and your research comes from that grade level. So I am sure you might have questions about this in class when we go over it, but this is what your research is over. These items right here, okay? Digital gaming, the flipped classroom, the SPED classroom, and project-based learning, and how do you incorporate those into your class lesson that you will be preparing. That's your research. So when we come down here and it talks about your citations, that is what your citations are coming from. Your citations are coming from the research that you've done on one of those four items, either digital gaming, the flipped classroom, project-based learning, or the SPED environment. Okay, and that is also what your written presentation is about as well. Your written presentation is about the digital gaming, how to best incorporate that into your lesson, or the flipped classroom, or special education, or project-based learning. That is where and what you will be writing your presentation about. The rest of it is your basic lesson plan. Okay, I will want to know when you are presenting your lesson, I will want to see that you are prepared with the lesson, that you've actually used the technology before, and that it's been arranged prior to class. And that is what we are looking at here in this section when we talk about preparedness. That if you are using technology, I can tell that you've used it before and that you're comfortable using it. Because very often we get into the classroom and teachers do not know how to use the technology, and then the students get crazy and it's mass chaos. When we look at knowledge, I need to know that you're an expert in your subject area. So if you're doing math, I need to know that you understand math content. If you're doing science, I need to understand that you know science content, so on and so forth. And that's what we're talking about there. And this is not the knowledge about your digital gaming or your SPED classroom or the flipped classroom or project-based learning. this is specific to the subject area, the content that you're actually teaching. Your objectives, a lot of students miss this. They must be verbal and they must be in writing. A lot of students misunderstand that. They must be both verbal and in writing. If you do one or the other, this is where you're going to end up in this category over here, 6 points instead of 10. So make sure that you actually, and you can do this in a couple of ways. You can either write them on a Microsoft Word document and project them, or you can write them on the whiteboard when we get into the classroom. Engagement, this is one that some students struggle with. A lot of times when we look at engagement, we want to get our students highly involved. That means that they're constantly doing things and they're constantly being asked to be active learners. A lot of times what will happen when we present a lesson, teachers will ask questions like, who can tell me what 2 plus 2 is? Or who can tell me what the directions are? When you ask questions like that, who can tell me, or can I get a volunteer, or things like that, it really closes off your classroom for engagement, and it only engages a very select few handful of students. So make sure that your students are all doing something, that they're all answering questions, or that they're all actively thinking or trying to solve a problem. When we talk about presentation, this is what we are looking at here. We are looking at the presenters being confident. Again, that goes really in line with making sure that you understand your technology and that you understand the content together, and that you have a strong presentation. Okay, that you can present yourself well and your information well. So where I take off points for this is when students stand up in the front, they talk for a very short amount of time, which tells me in the lesson that they didn't necessarily participate in the group very well, especially if they're extra quiet. I mean, we've got to start getting used to presenting and getting up in front of people. That's the only thing that we're going to be doing for a long period of time, is we're going to be presenting in front of people. So we need to make sure that, we need to make sure that we get comfortable with doing that. Closure. This is really interesting. A lot of students talk about closure, and they just ask a couple of questions at the end of class, or the teacher sums up what the class has learned. Basically, the teacher says, hey, don't forget, these are the 3 things, these were the objectives, these are the things that we covered today, and that's what a lot of students do. Really, what needs to happen here is that students are either writing, or they're writing the answer to a question that you've asked, or they are verbally talking to somebody. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about engagement and getting all students involved. How are you going to get all students involved in the closure activity? Because there is a ton of research out there that talks about how closure is probably the most important piece of a lesson. If you want students to truly remember what they have learned, this is where you're going to do it, is in the closure activity, by having either the students talk out loud to another person, and this is all students, or have all students write something down based on questions that you have asked that have allowed you to basically formatively assess your students, is ultimately what you're doing here. Okay, so the questions that you ask the students to talk about or to write about need to come directly from the lesson, those important pieces that you really want them to know. We've already talked about the citations. Remember, that is coming from your research. The time, your presentation, aka your lesson, you're teaching a lesson. Your lesson needs to run between 18 and 22 minutes. It's basically like we're doing a half day of school. If you go to a traditional school, their classrooms will run about 22-minute classes. Especially if it's a half day of school, like there's a track meet or something after school, or some kind of state conference situation with athletics. So that's kind of what we're running there. The written presentation, again, this is in reference to your research. Okay, you will need to turn in a lesson plan, and I've already given you the lesson plan format that I like. So you will turn in a lesson plan. You'll actually physically turn the lesson plan into me, And then the written presentation, that is the piece that you'll actually turn in with the citations attached to Blackboard. So one more time, let me be clear about that. The citations and the written presentation are the two things you will put together in one paper, must be proper APA stylization. You'll put that into one paper, and that is what you will turn in to Blackboard, the citations and the written presentation. The hard copy of the lesson, that will come to me directly when you present the day of your presentation, which will be the day of our final. And finally, the collaboration. This is one of the areas where people will really differ, especially in groups. As we are in the classroom, excuse me, as we are in the classroom, I will be making sure that everybody is participating equally. And then also your collaboration when you actually teach the lesson, that 18 to 22 minutes, that everybody shares equally in that presentation. Again, basically what will happen if you're not sharing in your presentation equally, I will take that automatically as you not having done enough in your group, and that you basically, your group is trying to find a spot for you. Okay, so make sure that you all contribute equally. There was one student in the past that I've had, actually a couple of students have done this. In the past, what students have done is they've written the research presentation part of it. They've written They have written the presentation for the research, and they did the citations, and they put that together, so they didn't think they actually needed to teach anything for the group. And that's not accurate. You must actually teach, even if you are the one who actually writes the paper. Now, my suggestion is that you all, 3 or 4 of you, however many of you are in a group, make sure that you all contribute to the paper equally. That would be the best. You guys each find a research study or two, and you bring that into the written presentation, and you can do this through Google Docs, one of the best collaborative writing resources out there. Okay, so I am sure that you will have several questions about this, but that is what I'm looking for. You are ultimately creating a lesson that will incorporate one of these 4 things. Your lesson will incorporate either digital gaming or the flipped classroom or the special education classroom. And then again, that's how do you incorporate technology properly in a special education classroom. And then same thing for project-based learning. If you do a project-based learning lesson, how do you properly incorporate the technology into that lesson? Okay, so yeah, I'm sure you'll have questions. We can discuss those on Wednesday when we get into class, and otherwise you can email me ahead of time and let me know. Remember, your group is working on this together. So thank you for listening.